Okay, well, looks like we're on. So thank you all for having me join this space and present on health-related social needs. I'm excited to be here under the circumstances. It's unfortunate, and I hope that this presentation we're able to finish and get through everything. But thank you all. And so I'll do a quick introduction. My name is Elliot Sky. I'm program manager at Pacific Source for health-related social needs. So I live in this world, I'm steeped in it all the time, and I'm happy to present and answer some questions. With that, I will begin the presentation. As an initial kind of gut reaction, can I kind of pull the room for everyone who's here, just getting a quick kind of 1 to 10, 1 being or 0 being I've never heard of health-related social needs at all, 10 being I'm totally familiar, I get it. This is all going to be review for me. Can I just kind of get a sense of where everyone's at?
Feel free to post those in the chat too. We can kind of do it that way.
Yeah. This is great to see. I'm excited to see, except for I was about to say this and then John posts that he's at a 1. That's great. I will give a high level overview for the sake of this meeting space, but I can also see that a lot of people at this meeting are pretty darn familiar with this information. So I'm excited to see that. So going back, looking at health-related social needs, and I kind of going to leave my screen in non-presenter mode here so everyone can see what kind of some upcoming slides look like. What I want to share about is health-related social needs is a new Medicaid benefit that is in the process of being rolled out right now in the state of Oregon. It's an exciting new opportunity. It's built into a kind of a short-term waiver, but there's a lot of work and planning going on into what next steps would be as well. That's the most important aspect to this conversation, is really understanding what these benefits are, who they would serve, kind of the unique nature of what they are, and how Pacific Source is involved and how different organizations can be involved as well. The Community Capacity Building Funding Grant is just that. It's a grant, and it's there to support organizations who want to be involved, becoming service providers of these benefits. So I will touch on that, and that's important for organizations, people to know about, but I'm not going to spend as much time on some of the specifics of the grant, in that, it's really kind of secondary to the benefits that are coming out. The origin of these benefits is through something called an 1115 Demonstration Waiver. Every 5 years, the state of Oregon, through their Medicaid, can request to try something different in their Medicaid program. They're requesting to CMS at the federal level, and if they get approval, they can start a new waiver. And that is where we are currently at right now with HRSN, health-related social needs. It's a part of that approved waiver, and it runs through September of 2027. This slide really just illustrates that health-related social needs is a covered benefit and is an important component of how we view our medical benefits in Oregon. So everyone is generally familiar with physical health, behavioral health, dental, pharmacy, all being covered under their Medicaid benefits. What is lesser known is non-emergency medical transportation also being a covered benefit for our Medicaid members, and now health-related social needs will be as well. There are 3 core service areas for health-related social needs, and I'll get into them briefly in this presentation. Those are climate services, housing services, nutrition services, and there's an additional benefit that really connects all 3 of these, called outreach and engagement. And I meant to say this at the beginning of this presentation. If folks have questions throughout this presentation, you want me to spend a little bit more time on this, on a specific slide, go into a little more detail, please feel free just to unmute yourself, you know, say, hey, Elliot, I got a question. Keep it relatively informal, or you can post something in the chat. And maybe Eric, if you see some questions going to the chat, you can flag me so I can respond to those. But we'll have time, a little bit of time at the end to talk as well. But if you just want me to pause a little bit more and share some more depth on something, just let me know.
Will do.
Thank you. So our climate services, those include medically necessary devices such as air conditioners, heaters, air filtration devices, mini refrigeration units, portable power supplies. In essence, it's identifying equipment that would be needed or services. In this case, it's equipment that would be needed for a member who has a medical condition that requires one of these devices to support their health. Housing services include rent and temporary housing, utilities, housing navigation services, tenancy sustaining services, and modifications and remediations. And there's a little bit more, there's a fair bit more complexity to the housing services than climate. And there's also an approach to this waiver where OHA is going to be phasing in, Oregon Health Authority is going to be phasing in benefits over time, rather than just presenting all available benefits at the very beginning. Nutrition services include nutrition counseling and education, medically tailored meals, meals or pantry stocking, and fruit and vegetable prescriptions. And then lastly, I talked about this briefly, but there's an overlaying component to all of this, which is also a benefit of health-related social needs called outreach and engagement. What that looks like is that OHA is encouraging, I'll talk a little bit more about this definition, but health-related social needs service providers and CCOs such as Pacific Source to really identify priority populations within their communities and be able to perform outreach and engagement to those priority populations. This can be reimbursed on a level of a provider. So if an organization is providing the services and they have a service contract with Pacific Source or any CCO, they can get reimbursed on what's called a fee schedule. So there's a set reimbursement for these services or this service. To give an overview of the timeline, not all these benefits are launching at the same time. So climate benefits launched the beginning of March, and they are live right now. So if there are eligible members who want to receive climate benefits right now, they can contact Pacific Source. They can put in an application, have that processed and reviewed, and be able to get climate benefits at this time. Housing and food come in at different times as well. So housing benefits will launch on November 1st, and food benefits will launch January 1st. And as I described before, there's a phasing in of housing benefits over time through this period. So housing is going to start with those who are at risk for homelessness, who have secured housing. So a member who is in their house, but is maybe receiving an eviction notice and needs rent support. There's a few other service lines that support those members, but that's the classification of population to be served in the initial November 1st launch of these benefits. And then there's going to be additional areas like members who have secured housing but aren't, do not live in that housing yet and who need support to get into their housing. That will be a phased-in approach. And then homelessness, those who are experiencing homelessness is also going to phase in as well at a later time. For member eligibility, there are some key areas to understand in terms of who is eligible. The overlying component is that they have to be an OHP member, and then they have to be under a covered population. So that would be all those covered populations have kind of an overarching consistency of being somebody who's who's in a transition population. So somebody who's involved with child welfare, including youth leaving foster care, homelessness or at risk for homelessness, release from custody or residential behavioral health settings, transitioning from Medicaid to Medicare, called dual status, and then in January, youth with special healthcare needs. In addition, members have to have a health condition that's approved. As a list of health conditions. This is pretty abbreviated for the sake of this slide, but a lot of them are chronic conditions that relate to why they would need these benefits and how it would affect their health. And then the social health need, it can get confusing because it's another box, but really it's really just saying a demonstration that the person does in fact need this device or this benefit. So for instance, a pretty straightforward example would be if somebody had COPD, they were so they're an OHP member, they're in one of the covered population groups, they have COPD, but if they had a whole house purification, they wouldn't necessarily qualify for the air purifier. They have to, of course, need that air purifier, and that's what that social need is talking about. I just want to share, since so many organizations are used to interfacing and applying for flex funds. These are services that have been available to the public and been requested. These overlap a lot with health-related social needs, and so we get a lot of questions around our flexible services programs and how these are going to interrelate. Flexible services is reactive. It requires outreach to the coordinated care organization, to Pacific Source, to request these benefits. Whereas health-related social needs is proactive. It has that outreach and engagement kind of built into it. And I'm going to pause just for a second with a crying kid. Hi. And then it's health-related social needs is also subject to denial and appeal rights, just like any other health benefit is. And at Pacific Source, we're really looking at these two programs to work in unison. As we've developed our health services team, who are going to be fielding applications and phone calls around these services, we've built in our health services team, we've built our flexible services and our health-related social needs programs together. We're going to be looking at trying to have a single application that can just move from, if somebody requests health-related social needs benefit and gets denied for, not meeting eligibility, that they could be immediately moved to flex services, and they could look at covering that benefit through flex services funds, trying to minimize, number of applications, just trying to make it easier and more straightforward, since these cover really similar areas of social needs. As we were building out this process, we are creating a referral pathway through an organization, a software program called Connect Oregon Unite Us. The intention on this is to really connect organizations to this work, the organizations who are providing these services to this work, and utilize a common platform that just makes the whole process smoother and easier and makes communication more straightforward. Overall, the concept of why we want to do this is that it makes it more secure, it reduces risks, it creates that closed loop referral system that is needed when you're dealing with health benefits. We want to decrease processing times and make this a lot more efficient, and make it a lot easier for organizations to get reimbursed for these services. When an organization is interested in becoming a service provider and providing these benefits and get connected to Connect Oregon, this is a pathway that they would take to submit a claim and get reimbursed for that. So identifying an individual, that the work that goes into that is eligible for reimbursement through the outreach and engagement benefit. And then you submit that request, it gets received, and eligibility and authorization is performed by Pacific Source. Then there can be a care management plan created, and that referral is sent to an HRSN service provider. That could be the same organization. It could just get sent right back to that organization, or it could be a different organization in the case of it might, there might be another organization that's better suited to provide those benefits. Then that organization accepts the referral, delivers the service, kind of closes that loop, and submits for reimbursement from Pacific Source.
May I ask a quick question?
Yep, of course.
Thanks. My name's Kevin. Who is contemplated to be making the care management plan? Is it the provider on the ground or somebody at Pacific Source?
Oh, that is a great question. I actually don't have an answer for that. You win an award for being the first one to ask that question for me. So I'm not quite certain in our process. I would have to maybe check in to see who's currently doing that and look at the system that exists whenever we're creating care management plans right now. That's a great question, Kevin. I'll have to get back to the group on that.
Okay, thanks. Appreciate it.
So I'll briefly go over the community capacity building funding grant as well. This, in essence, like I described before, there'll be organizations that want to become HRSN service providers. They will want to provide the benefits themselves. And there's a grant set up across the state to support those organizations and kind of building their readiness to provide these benefits. Most organizations are eligible to become HRSN service providers and apply for this grant. But in essence, the core of their work needs to align with the benefits that they're providing. So either providing housing already, food, climate supports, or being in a space that aligns for meaningful outreach and engagement services. They need to intend to serve eligible populations, have strong community relationships, be able to, and of course being able to and interested in building capacity to become a health-related service provider and meet requirements for that. There are 4 categories of funding that are available to organizations who want to become health-related, who apply for this grant and want to become health-related social needs service providers. If I don't use the acronym, I slur the word, so hence why I always say HRSN. These categories broadly are technology, business practices, workforce, outreach, education, and convening. And really the process that I recommend an organization goes through is identifying what their role would be within a service provider network, what kind of services they want to provide, are they capable of providing out of the identified services that are available in housing and nutrition, and then doing an assessment of their organization to really identify what is it going to take to get there, to be able to provide these services, what kind of support do we need. I would recommend an organization does that assessment even before looking at these categories. But then the next step being then look at these categories and say, okay, what can we ask for? What's appropriate funding we can request through this grant to support our organization to be ready.
Elliot, I have a quick question about that, about the workforce. Staff positions for up to 18 months. Is there any sense of any continuing funding to support this after that, or is that just as far as we're looking right now?
Well, there's a second funding. So there's a current grant application that we're in right now. And then there's a second grant application. So there's funding through the grant or through this benefit itself. But then there's I think that is something we're open to discussing with organizations. I'm gonna pick up my son here. We might hear some crying. I apologize. Connor,
No
you wanna
worries.
watch? Yeah, I apologize to everybody. So I think that is something that we could discuss on an individual basis if an organization was looking for increased support through kind of their plan. But right now there's not additional funding identified for providing additional support. The intention of using these funds to become ready to be an HRSN service provider is that the organization is identifying a sustainability plan for down the road. So, for instance, a staffing position up to 18 months, the intention of that is to support readiness. And then once that organization is providing these benefits, getting reimbursed, there's a plan for making that sustainable going forward and not requiring ongoing funding to be able to provide these benefits.
Gotcha.
Does that answer your question, Eric?
Yeah.
Okay.
Perfect. Thank you.
The community capacity building funding grant is currently in an open window right now that closes at the end of this month. That's very soon for all organizations that are involved in this process. Notices to award will go out in July through September. Just to provide a little more detail there, the state has given, you want to get down? Sorry. The state has given CCOs or Pacific Source options of whether or not we end up batching our applications, meaning whether or not we'd have some applications that we process first and then other applications that we process second. We're working our goal is to be able to process all of our applications quickly and in what's called batch one, try to get that done quickly so that we can provide notice of award and funding disbursements on the earlier timelines. But if we don't have the capacity, if we have too many applications, since we're breaking this up by region, we have the ability to do a second batch, which just kicks that timeline out a little bit for those applicants. And then there's going to be a second grant window open for this funding with the same amount of funding, approximately the same amount of funding available in early 2025 as well. And OHA just hasn't announced exactly when that's going to be yet. I wanted to share some additional information that has been done by Pacific Source in identifying what our provider networks, our HRSN service provider networks could look like. We have identified 3 categories. We've identified 3 categories that we are looking for organization to potentially step into in supporting this network of benefits. One would be a hub. The other would be a service providers. That's organizations who's directly providing the benefits themselves. And then a third role called a connector. And I'll go into each of these in a little bit more detail. I want to emphasize on this slide the word potential. None of these roles are set in stone. None of them are essential to if an organization who may want to step into this role. It's going to look each region. We have 4 different regions with Pacific Source that we're going to be rolling out benefits in. And within each region, and within each service type, it's going to look really different in terms of what the community needs and what organizations are involved. So that's my kind of caveat to this. I apologize. Are you picking up a lot of kid noises that's distracting?
No, you're good.
Okay, thank you. Potential roles are listed here for a hub. It could include network development, subcontracting, oversight, member referrals to the HRSN service providers, HRSN service coordination for members, provider invoice processing and payment, and reporting related to health-related services. And it can be, again, a mix and match of those things. So, you know, working with each organization who may want to serve in these roles to understand what they're interested in providing, what that would look like, timeline, all of that would be further discussed. And then HRSN service providers are really, they're the ones who provide the benefits to the members. They would contract with Pacific Source or a hub if it's established to set up that closed loop referral system. They would generate benefits requests internally or through a hub or Pacific Source. They would have their own reporting and oversight requirements. And yeah, again, they would provide the benefits to the members. And then the connector role is really illustrating a connector in OHA's contract language that we have right now is very basic. So we're kind of establishing at Pacific Source how we may want to use that term. Quick caveat is that not all CCOs are using this term or using it in the same way. So it's just a way for us to differentiate these roles a little bit. And there's going to be more development with all of this, but really it's just a person or an organization who connects individuals with their benefits. And they could either be contracted or not. So if an organization wanted to get reimbursed for providing outreach and engagement, they would set up a HRSN service provider contract, and the benefit that they would be providing would be outreach engagement, and they would get reimbursed for that. But there may be many organizations who, you know, serve smaller populations, really don't see themselves as interfacing and making a lot of requests for these benefits, and they may want to be tapped into the network. They may want to be aware of what's going on and who to send things to, and you know, even be, you know, interfaced with Connect Oregon in a limited capacity, but not want to go through the other requirements and obligations or systems within becoming a contracted entity with Pacific Source. And then they would not be eligible for reimbursement if that's the case.
Looks like we have our first question in the chat. Can an HRSN provider be limited in where they provide services? An example, will you be looking for Crook County-based contracts for providers or entire CCO service area like Tri-County? While we have some providers who work Tri-County, some are more localized, wondering if both types of providers will be approved or a greater service area will be incentivized.
So you don't have to serve everywhere. An organization can self-identify what populations they best serve and who their members are that they would serve, and they're not required to serve outside of that. So, you know, the encouraging larger and smaller entities to join within this network. I think there's going to be some great examples of large organizations that have a broad reach and can serve, you know, many members across the spectrum. And there's going to be organizations that may just serve, you know, culturally specific or populations, maybe just Hispanic speaking, or maybe just homeless youth, or there may be subsets of populations where they don't have the capacity to be able to assist anyone who walks in the door, and they're kind of identifying who their membership would be that they would support. So both are welcome.
And I had a question about, you know, maybe some examples of what these three types or these three categories might look like to those of us who are working in the housing arena. You know, when I think of a service provider, I'm kind of thinking when it comes to housing and these benefits, you know, someone who's providing assistance to those who are at risk, you know, rent assistance to keep people housed, for example. Does that sound accurate compared to like a connector for us would be a street outreach organization that is connecting with individuals and then kind of steering them towards a service provider, like someone who is providing that service? Am I getting that right?
Yeah, that's spot on. That's kind of the intention of kind of creating that separate category for a connector, is recognizing that there's going to be organizations that don't provide direct service who are tapped into networks of community members who need to be connected to these services themselves. And yeah, that's exactly what that kind of role looks like.
What about hubs? How would we characterize a hub as in relation to the other two?
A hub, I'll maybe this next slide will illustrate that.
Okay.
I
Sorry, I
will.
got ahead.
Oh, that's fine, no problem. This is a little bit of a busy picture, but it's hopefully can kind of illustrate how these different organizations or these different whatever they're called roles can play within a network. And again, just to caveat things, is none of this is set in stone. This is an illustration to provide some kind of thought-provoking. Here's, oh, I could see how my organization could fit within this, or and then to support organizations as they're identifying how they would what roles they would play. So in general, Pacific Source would provide oversight over kind of the whole system. And they would be both receiving and sending reports to OHA to meet requirements that are needed. A hub could provide oversight over the network themselves. There could be direct service contracts with hubs instead of through Pacific Source. They also would be tapped into additional resources that would be available within like the housing or nutrition service areas. So if a member need wraparound services or didn't qualify for health-related social needs benefits, they could be aware of where those other benefits exist within the local network and how to send the right referrals and get that person connected. And also bring in those connector organizations. Those organizations would be providing benefits requests, but not fulfilling them themselves. But part of my vision around connector organizations and something that I would love to see develop in our regions would be creating a communication loop with those organizations. So if you are dealing with a population that hasn't been well served by our current health system or has apprehension about how they interfacing in this type of a network, maybe they're able to have a front door access to these benefits through one singular organization, one singular point person at an organization, and they're able to get their communication needs through that organization rather than having to go through another organization and communicate with somebody else or receive phone calls down the road from someone they don't know. So that's kind of a vision that I have within this of an important role that coordinator organizations could play within this big picture. And then of course you have the service providers, and they're fulfilling these benefits, and a hub certainly could be a service provider as well. I think many times they would be, and they could provide services. So there could be another fulfillment arrow that's pointing down from them as well to the pictures at the bottom. But that's the final, that's the member getting the benefits. So
we have a question in the chat. Can state agencies that provide housing be providers, be an HRSN service provider?
Yes.
And then another one is comprehensive list of clinical needs, chronic conditions available as a reference for both flex service funds and HRSN applications. Is there like a guide?
Yeah, there's a lot of information going into details about what are all the health conditions. I would note the only official service contracts we have to provide this information are for climate devices. OHA is in a process right now of writing up the contract for the CCOs and what's called a guidance document to be able to provide concrete, here's exactly what the health conditions are. It gets a little bit complicated, for some services have a little bit of a different different some variation in like health conditions that qualify for different benefits. But there's a lot of information out there, and I can follow up with you, Eric, and send along what I call my massive links. I tried to organize them into really user-friendly, accessible content, and then the deep dive into some of the information that has all of that specific, here's exactly what's written currently in draft form for what is eligibility for each of these benefits. There's lots of content that goes deeper into that. So to kind of roll into finishing up, and this is the last slide I have here. I just want to acknowledge that there's a lot of unknowns here. There's a lot of gaps, opportunities. This is a new innovative program. It's something that there are multiple states across the country that are in a parallel process to Oregon right now. North Carolina is about a year ahead, but is doing something that's substantively different than what we're doing. So, there's not really a great direct comparison, which means we're really paving the way in Oregon into providing social services through our health care systems. And it's with that, there's a lot of challenges. We're building the plane as we're flying it, as the saying would be. A lot of, like I was describing, a lot of things aren't known right now and with certainty, which makes things challenging, but there's also a lot of opportunity to kind of shape this process and see where this lands us down the road. We're kind of looking I guess a separate criteria. It's not really a criteria, but we're looking for organizations to step into this space who are able to be adaptive and kind of flexible with these changes, especially as we talked about a hub. For reference, we're not planning for our hubs to start in full hub capacity at the beginning of the benefit rollout. So say housing is November 1st. We're not looking at having housing hubs fully established come November 1st. We're looking to solicit organizations kind of what they could envision in terms of how they could be a hub and start building that infrastructure, planning for down the road, those capabilities coming in. So again, that could look like an organization gets contracted initially with Pacific Source, but then 6 months, year and a half down the road, as hub infrastructure is established, that service contract might shift over to a hub. There's just a lot changing and fluid within this process. And one of the big things we don't have right now is a fee schedule for housing and nutrition. So that's the way you get reimbursed as a service provider, is through Medicaid fee schedule. Looks a lot like what it looks like for medical providers. That fee schedule is important to have, and it's in draft form right now. So there are documents that organizations can look at to see what are the draft fees, but OHA is working on solidifying those fee schedules. So all of that, just, as an organization, is understanding, how do we create a sustainable model with these benefits for our organization? That's, challenging. I just, want to just be upfront about that that's a hard process without concrete numbers to look at as well.
Looks like we do have one more question about how HRSN benefits and/or flex funds will interact. Because depending upon member eligibility, that flex funds generally mandate that they are part of a care plan and approved by a primary care provider. So how will those two things kind of interact? Can you shed some light on that?
I can and I can't. I know that we've already kicked over some of our current requests to our flex. It's the same team, but to our flex program. So I don't know if they've just had to contact the primary care provider and get approval for it, but they they haven't planned to request an additional application. So I think the CCO is likely, or Pacific Source is likely seeking out the additional information that's needed in order to fulfill it through Flex. But I don't know Health Services specific process right now. I could ask them and better understand what that's looking like to kind of finalize that. And it relates to my other blind spot, which of course is who's setting up that service plan and what does that look like?
Right. We have another question from Kevin about, are bundled reimbursements like critical time intervention being considered to complement fee schedules?
Are bundled, say that one. I'm gonna pull up the shot so I can see it myself.
Yeah, and we have one more in the chat.
Yeah, are bundled reimbursements like I am not aware of critical time intervention as a reimbursement, so I think that's a little challenging for me to speak on. I know I just had a phone. Was in a meeting with the main lead for from OHA for nutrition, and there was some discussion around, like, for instance, transportation, delivery of food benefits, and there was some discussion around, like, how do we really complement the fee schedule or build into the fee schedule that understanding that that delivery is expensive, and so there was some she was expressing some consideration that OHA is going through around what that looks like, but I'm not aware right now of any kind of bundled reimbursement models for HRSN at this time. And I think that will also depend on what the fee schedule ends up looking like. Like, is admin built into that fee schedule a little bit more? Are things like transportation built in a little bit, or are we going to really have to evaluate that separately?
And we have the question from Chuck, and then Stacy has her hand up. Question from Chuck is, if a service provider serves unsheltered populations, would climate services include sleeping bags, propane stoves, warm clothing, or not? And after Stacy, then we might be able to go to Nicole. But my I'm waiting for Elliot to come back, but my understanding, Chuck, about some of the climate services is that they're not in relation to, cold weather, for example. Just kind of seems a little bit closer, that they're more like, is it more like energy assistance or weatherization? Is kind of what it seemed to me by description. But I will say my understanding of the climate services is kind of rudimentary. So
yeah, and to get on the question about the shelter, there's some kind of categories of housing that I don't have off the top of my head in terms of what is acceptable. In general, there has to be a way to hook up these devices and have them tied to that member. So really temporary housing generally doesn't work. I think there's some kind of subcategories of housing that I've heard brought up around climate units, but climate devices. But if somebody is in like a full shelter and they're homeless, oftentimes these benefits, well, they don't qualify for these.
I want to go to Stacy. She's had her hand up for a while. Go ahead, Stacy.
Oh, thank you so much, Elliot. Thank you for being here. We have recently received a number of phone calls from medical providers requesting items like generators for durable medical for CPAP machines, a battery pack, which we just ordered as a kind of a test product. There's several $100s for folks living in vehicles that are on CPAP or BiPAP machines. Is that something that would kind of fall into one of these categories, especially when it's been a referral from a physician?
Potentially for climate, the living in vehicles is a category I'm not totally sure about, but Yeah, there's like portable power supply, I believe, is one of the climate benefits that is one of the climate benefits. So that is definitely a possibility. If you had some specific, like those providers could either be directed towards me to look into specific situations, or if you had specific situations that you wanted me to look into, I'd be happy to do so with like an email, a follow-up email.
That sounds great. Thank you so much.
And then kind of moving on down there, we have a question from Nicole about if a service provider provides electricity, heat, and air conditioning and refrigerators in shelter, is that allowable? I'm not quite sure if he answered that one previously, maybe.
Yeah, that was the one I was trying to answer before when I was talking about shelters. That I'm not sure. I think in many times, I think in many cases, I think with shelters that wouldn't be allowable. There has to be, I think, some level of permanency to the housing in order to be able to like have these hooked up and available to that member ongoing.
And
So-
yeah, well, go ahead.
I was just going to go through some questions. So
Okay.
Lindsay asked, how long will the contracting take for CBOs who want to contract with Pacific Source? We are developing that process right now, getting a lot of questions, and it's important questions. We're not ready. We still need to go through a process of what that's going to look like for Pacific Source. I think in terms of length of time, it's going to be a while before we have that solidified. We're not requesting any service provider contracts right now. We're providing the climate benefits through Pacific Source. We have an internal system for that at the time. And housing doesn't come live until November. So it's going to be a couple more months before we have our internal process solidified. That said, I don't think it's going to be a strenuous process. There's you kind of have to apply through OHA and then kind of submit to the CCO for approval, and then we'll go through the process of setting up that organization through Pacific Source. But more to come on what that contracting would entail and when that's going to be ready. But I would say generally, if an organization is interested, wait on the contracting part. There's no rush to jump into the contracting right now. And then Jessica, for HRSN service providers, are there limitations on reimbursements based on original funding source? Example, we are able to be reimbursed if funding comes from a grant versus fundraising, or are we able to be reimbursed if funding came from a grant versus fundraising? So there can't be a duplicating of reimbursement for these benefits, and the reimbursement for these benefits is going to come from the fee schedule. So if an organization elects to receive these benefits through HRSN, they would be reimbursed based on what the fee schedule is, and it wouldn't be able to be reimbursed through like a grant or fundraising for them. If they have alternative pathways for delivering of that service for the member and they're utilizing additional funds, federal revenue sources or any other kind of funding sources, they would get reimbursed through that separate pathway.
So you're essentially, what you're referring to here is it cannot be supplanted. So if you already have funds, you already got a grant to provide generators to someone, and you provided a generator to someone, you couldn't apply for this funding in order to pay yourself back for the thing that you already got a grant for, right? Is that an example?
Right. You can't, yeah, right. You can't apply for this for reimbursement through delivery of the service through the grant that you did instead. However, you can identify organizationally if this person meets eligibility. You could choose to submit an eligibility request as long as that person isn't already receiving the benefits. You can't like terminate the benefits and then reapply if they're already in the existing. If they're receiving the benefits, they're not eligible for HRSN. But if you're looking organizationally at whether or not this is paid for through a different funding source or through HRSN, you could submit an application through HRSN. If that gets approved, you can get reimbursed and not be spending down some of those other funds through maybe grants or fundraising. Is that clear? Okay. These, I'm going to look at Lindsay's question here. These are member-specific benefits tied to an individual, not for a group or ongoing ops. Okay, so I think that's just a comment. Lindsay also asked, will Pacific Source share investments and community benefit fund be redirected to help increase capacity to respond to the waiver gaps are not supported in the waiver funding? Yeah, so that's ongoing discussions around those funding areas I think we're looking at creating kind of a comprehensive approach, partially comprehensive approach around how these are funded. But we haven't made any clear decisions that I'm aware of exactly how those are how as HRSN comes in, how it's gonna change those streams of funding, if that makes sense. I'm gonna put myself on mute for 1 second. I apologize. I'm gonna pause in answering questions.
And so Chuck's question is about housing service provider providing shelter, moving folks into permanent housing with security deposits, first month's rent. So I will just reference earlier in the slides we had, mention about the housing there's going to be more housing services later, but the initial ones are for those who are at risk. So that I think is not going to be talking about security deposits and possibly rent. That's a good question. But it looked to me, and from the previous webinars, that it primarily was going to be something that we're looking to serve those folks who are eligible that are needing assistance with staying housed as opposed to achieving housing. So I'm not sure if that fully answers your question, Chuck, but that is something that has been mentioned in several of the webinars about this particular funding. I will say that I am a little bit interested about how that kind of interacts with Lindsay's question about state long-term rental assistance dollars and the HRSN rental assistance benefit. So good. That's a good question. That's kind of where my brain went. Just so that we can kind of understand how they're going to deconflict. Are they kind of, because one only serves the one eligible population, which is a population who's eligible for this funding, as opposed to the other. So I didn't know, maybe Molly has some insight into that. While we wait for Elliot to come back online. I know.
Oh yeah, I'm back. Here. I can you're spot on, Eric, with your kind of analysis of so the first phase of housing is going to be for members who are in current housing and need support to stay in their current housing. The going from a shelter to permanent housing is planned for a next phase in the benefit. And then with Lindsay, your question is a great question. I think that could be a good one to, I'll copy and paste this out of this into an email. And that one, I don't have a straightforward answer for you, or I just don't know the answer to how those are gonna, state long-term rental assistance dollars are gonna be coordinated. I would have to refer to OHA for that. And then Kevin, you asked about technical assistance. Yes, we're currently in the process of building out technical assistance support plans for members to be able to provide them documents and reference stuff on our website, and then also have point of contacts for technical assistance for in our organization as well.
Well, and I want to be really really conscious of your time, and you're dealing with a sick kid. So we'll probably just stop it there. And if you have additional questions for Elliot or about this process, you can send them to me directly, you can send them to the HLC board. And we can kind of continue to push those questions onward. We can probably stop the recording at this point so that we can kind of finish up here. And I don't have control over that. It's on your
Yeah,
side.
where is that now?
It
Where's the
is-
button located
uh,
for recording? I can stop my screen share. But then let me see if I can, oh, there's the recording. Okay.